I would love to welcome Carolyn to come and present to you. She's the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of the Mulloon Institute and has over 20 years' experience working across agriculture and environmental sectors. And she's going to talk about the work that they're doing and probably weave in her story as well. So thank you very much, Carolyn.
Thank you, Ingrid, for that lovely introduction. I just want to say that I'm really honoured to be here this evening to give this keynote address at the completion of the first stage of your collective impact project. I want to start by acknowledging the Whadjuk Noongar people on whose land we meet today, and I want to recognise Noongar Budja. I want to pay my respects to Noongar elders past, present and emerging, and my respects to Indigenous people and friends here in the audience today. I grew up on Biripi land on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, and the Biripi word for thank you is marambu. So I want to say marambu to the Whadjuk Noongar people for having me, and I want to say marambu to Craig and to Perth NRM for inviting me over. And I want to say marambu to all of you for taking the time to come and listen to this presentation. This evening I will introduce myself and give you a little bit about my background. I'll introduce very briefly the Mulloon Institute, and then I want to talk about the challenge that Craig set for me to talk about our projects where we've taken a collective impact approach. I want to frame these case studies around the principles of engagement that you've committed to for the collective impact project, and they are there on the screen. These principles I immediately identified with. They actually underpin the culture that we have developed at Mulloon. And developing that culture has also meant developing our team and their ability to know themselves, their strengths, and for them to find the courage to go on this journey of working alongside farmers and traditional owners to heal country. They also aligned with Theory U that some of you are familiar with, the work of Otto Sharma and his amazing team at MIT. But before I get into all of that, I want to introduce myself and the organisation that I lead. So I'm Carolyn Hall, and my current role is CEO and Managing Director of the Mulloon Institute. As I mentioned, I grew up on the mid-north coast of New South Wales in a small town called Taree, and it was a great childhood with trips to the beach and into the forest to collect firewood. It's really where I fell in love with the environment. I didn't know it then, but I had found my purpose. We talked earlier today about my mother growing up on a farm in Narrabri, and we discussed the impact of having my mother who'd always been on the land and her influence on us as children. But then I left Taree and I went to the Big Smoke, and I studied a Bachelor of Science at Macquarie University in Sydney, and I went on to undertake a Master's in Sustainable Development. And I even had the opportunity to lecture in the Graduate School of the Environment in Macquarie Uni in that program. But after 20 years of working in the environmental field as an ecologist, I had begun really to despair. What we were doing, it was just not working. We were leading the world in small mammal extinction, and offsetting, the newest trend at the time, was not doing anything to help our waterways or our landscapes, let alone respecting First Nations knowledge. I'm a wife and a mother of two beautiful sons, and I have a keen eye on the future and what it looks like for them and for all our future generations. And then in 2017, I was introduced to Tony Coote and the work of the Mulloon Institute, the groundbreaking catchment scale work that they were doing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. This really has informed my dedication to Maloon and all the work that I do. And now I want to share some of this sense of hope with others. So who is the Maloon Institute? We're a not-for-profit research, education and advocacy organisation. We were founded by Tony Coote and his wife Tony. Tony was deeply concerned with food and water security for Australia. He understood that we needed to repair and restore our landscapes, and through his incredible generosity, he established the Maloon Institute in 2011. Tony was really informed also by his relationship with the very respected UN elder, Uncle Max Stulamunmun Harrison, who told us that nature is the greatest teacher. They recognised the need for culturally attuned water management in Australia. Tony was also influenced by the work of the famous landscape thinker and reader, Peter Andrews. Very sadly, we lost Tony in 2018 to cancer, but his generosity has lived on, and he bequeathed both his farms to the Institute, located near Bungendore in the southern tablelands of New South Wales, quite close to Canberra. The Institute forms the parent organisation for two for-purpose businesses that deliver their profits when they make them back to the Maloon Institute. Maloon Creek Natural Farms supports a free-ranged, pasture-raised, chemical-free egg enterprise on biodynamic pastures with currently over 24,000 chickens that produce around about 80,000 eggs per week, and a small beef cattle enterprise of around about 300 head. Maloon Consulting is the other for-purpose entity in the group, and that enables us to provide advice directly to farmers and to natural resource professionals on a fee-for-service basis. We also rely quite heavily on grant funding, corporate sponsorship and some philanthropy to meet our financial needs. Tony really understood that the Institute would need to have a financial model that would provide revenue sources for us into the future. But who are we? We're a diverse group of people from a whole lot of different backgrounds. We all work remotely from different corners of Australia. We're committed change makers. We're supporting social change in the way that landscapes are perceived, valued and managed. We build strong relationships and we bring our full attention to rehydrating and restoring the function of landscapes. Our intention is to do this in partnership with those who manage landscapes. And it's through collaboration, through listening and respect, that we aim to build the new knowledge that brings real agency to restore those landscapes. We have an international reputation. Our work's been acknowledged by the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network as a demonstrator of sustainable, productive and profitable agriculture. We are the Australian case study in a recent United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification commissioned Economics of Drought report that was presented at COP16 in Riyadh in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and where I had the opportunity to meet up with your very own Bonnie Jupp. I also joined an Australian regenerative agriculture delegation to Zambia last year, and we went there to share our experience with farmers who experienced their worst drought in 40 years. Okay, but what is it that we actually do? We work with landholders and First Nations and universities and governments and industries really to rebuild climate resilient Australian landscapes. That UNCCD report that I mentioned reveals that global economic losses from drought between 2000 and 2019 are around 128 billion, but could be as high as 307 billion due to the knock-on effects. Ironically, the cost of implementing measures set out in national drought repair plans are estimated at $210 billion between 2016 and 2030. A nature positive economy could generate up to US $10 trillion annually and create 395 jobs by 2030. The case for action is pretty clear. So this is, I guess, some of the thinking that underpins why we do what we do. But now I want to talk a little bit about those projects where we've taken a collective impact approach and how they reflect those principles that I mentioned early on that you've identified and agreed to in your collective impact project. In terms of taking a collective impact approach, I really must recognise our keystone project over East, the Maloon Rehydration Initiative, but I'll also talk about some work here in WA and in the Northern Territory with our learning programs. So the MRI, wow, it is a catchment scale project delivered across 23,000 hectares in partnership with 23 landholders and along 50 kilometres of creek. The stats on the screen speak to the scale of the project, and it really is something remarkable. Importantly, this project has been fully benchmarked. It's a research project and it's generating data from hydrological biodiversity and from productivity monitoring to demonstrate a proof of concept for landscape rehydration. In 2018, funding under the NLP2 program enabled us to plan and complete many leaky weir structures on several Maloon properties, to set up this catchment-wide monitoring array to determine the effectiveness of rebuilding the Maloon catchment with leaky weirs, and to further develop now what is now an Australian-wide education and capacity building program. The MRI really has been a transformational project, and it's captured the imagination of the broader public. The photos here on the screen, this classic before and after photo, really shows what Tony Coote kind of kicked off back in 2006. And we've taken what was a small pilot project where the neighbours were really quite sceptical about this wealthy man coming into their valley and taking their water, to a catchment project in partnership with those very same sceptical neighbours. And once they saw the results of that project, they were right behind what we were doing, and have actually turned into our biggest advocates. We've used an approach that we call bringing the community along, where our neighbours, catchment landholders, the general public, scientists, regulators, politicians, our UN partners, they've all been invited in to see our progress, both in the pilot project and in the broader MRI. This really is a social project. It really took time to build that social soil or that social ecosystem. And it took time to build trust with the catchment landholders. When I think of a collective impact approach, building a social ecosystem so that participants are ready to take that next step, that's really critical to the success of collective impact. We need trust to move from an egocentric, that, what's in it for me or what's in it for my organisation mindset, to an ecosystem awareness approach, one where we are connected and we can willingly go to that next step of a shared vision for the health of our landscapes. When Tony Coote took that step and delivered the pilot project, he invited catchment landholders to come on a journey where they could share a vision for a restored and rehydrated catchment. Now, the MRI is really intended to be a long-term, fully monitored catchment restoration project. Many interventions designed to slow the movement of water and rebuild landscape function remain to be constructed. It's a long way from being finished. Much fencing and many thousands of trees still need to be planted. And importantly, the landholders and managers in the Maloon catchment need to continue to adapt their operations to ensure the environment continues to improve. The extensive monitoring of the project is beginning to demonstrate the many benefits that come with rebuilding the function of the catchment. As a result of the in-stream works, the multiple floods over the past 4 years have become fertility events again, and not the destructive events that floods so often are these days. 18 years worth of stream flow monitoring data has demonstrated that the installation of around 60 leaky weirs has so far had no detrimental effect on flow and has most likely improved those flows through the catchment. This is a long-term project, and it represents a long-term commitment to the health of landholders and the health of the catchment by Maloon. So I want to move on now to education and capacity building, and this is all around that principle of sharing the learnings. The MRI has really enabled Maloon to develop our national education and capacity building program. This has subsequently been supported by additional grants from the New South Wales Environmental Trust and from the Futures Drought Fund. Our learning programs are really guided by the ethos that we have some technical knowledge around water management and landscape rehydration to share, but we need to listen. We need to listen to farmers and we need to listen to traditional owners about the problems that they are trying to solve and what they know, and how then we can go on to build the knowledge together around how to repair landscapes and heal country. We don't have all the answers, but we do bring some knowledge to the table. Sharing and learning underpins landscape rehydration and restoration. From workshops and knowledge sharing and ceremony with the UN group back to country and our team, that sharing and learning is really important, and that really active listening is key. Our Futures Drought Fund funded Community of Practice project that's taken participants on a journey from workshops to more intense boot camps and boots on the ground days through a mentoring program where they've delivered projects on their own properties, all the time supported by learning from their peers and building new knowledge along the way. There have also been professionals intensives, because we must be inclusive and we must bring our regulators and those that still doubt the value of landscape rehydration along. And we can learn a lot from them about what we still need to address and what we still need to do to scale up this approach. We're now moving into a really interesting space where we're embarking on a First Nations co-design or co-created water stewardship certificate. We know that many hydrologically significant sites on farmlands are also significant culturally. So how do you do that? How do you create culturally attuned water management that way back when Tony and Uncle Max realised was required? How do you create those skills? Well, the path we're taking is co-designing a program that develops and recognises those skills and enables First Nations and farmers to work together to heal country, and that can possibly further unlock funding for First Nations employment on country. This is a challenging space for us. We're a non-Indigenous organisation, but approaching this with care and respect, we really hope that we can make a contribution and really kick off a conversation that needs to be had, right? So this again is about building trust. It's about building a shared vision for a better future and connecting and taking an ecosystem awareness approach. Yeah, wow, the regulatory reform work that we do, this is really around open communication and a long-term commitment. So since the MRI's inception in 2014, the Institute's on-ground and capacity building activities have expanded to every state and territory in Australia. We're pushing up against regulatory frameworks everywhere we go. The MRI has really highlighted that our environmental laws are not fit for purpose, and they're in fact creating barriers to environmental restoration across the country. This has led to the establishment of the Maloon Law Committee and to some initial regulatory changes in New South Wales, which has been great. The Law Committee, though, is going further, proposing a national code for landscape rehydration and restoration. And this really is a collective impact approach where we have national cabinet in this country, so all the states and territories can come together and they can agree on the outcomes that they want to see from landscape rehydration. So from our perspective, that's pretty simple. That's rehydrated, productive, biodiverse, culturally functioning landscapes. Then we would have a suite of standards that if landholders are delivering works that meet those standards, then they would be delivering on those agreed outcomes. This is really flipping environmental regulation on its head and looking at outcomes that we want to achieve rather than impacts that we want to mitigate. The process required to develop the code will involve bureaucrats, legal advisors, politicians, along with all of us really that are involved in nature repair. And I learned in Riyadh that we're not alone, right, in facing this challenge, that there are countries across the world that are grappling with these very same issues. This is really about open communication and about the challenges to landscape repair and a long-term commitment. These regulatory issues are not going to be solved overnight. It's going to take some time to do that. Yeah, so on the ground, this is the fun part of the work that we do. And I want to touch on some of these on-ground examples and just briefly talk about how commitment and inclusivity has been part of the collective impact approach. So this is a project that we've done up in the Territory. And the intent of this project was really to demonstrate drought resilience at scale and to assess the environmental and economic outcomes of landscape rehydration in the arid and pastoral landscape. And we established demonstration sites at 4 different stations. 2 were Indigenous owned and run, the Aileron Station and the Archie Aboriginal Land Trust, or for some of you may be familiar with the old Tea Tree Station. And then there were 2 stations run by Hewitt Cattle Co, Glen Helen Station and Ngawituma. This project, the results on the ground have been fantastic, but from the point of view of building on that success and expanding it, it's maybe been a bit of a challenge. The project had a much shorter lead time. It was more challenging as a result of that to build the trust, to expand the monitoring, both by the landholders, but by other external agencies that maybe could have come in and done some monitoring as well. And also it's been a bit challenging because of that short lead time and because of that still kind of emerging relationships to get together to work on new grants and new projects. But in saying that, the demonstrations have been incredibly successful, and this has been a very collaborative project. And success really did hinge on the good relationship that we had with the station owners and managers, and with our NT-based project manager, a guy called Mike Clark from Top End Conservation Management. Mike has just been fantastic, and Maloon remains committed to the north and remains committed to the rangelands. This next one, this is a project that we've completed at Bachelor in the NT, just probably about an hour, maybe an hour and a half south of Darwin, near the entry to Litchfield National Park. This, in contrast, has had a much longer lead time, and it's enabled a much closer relationship to be developed with the landholder, Fiona McBean, and her partner Pete. We've continued to put our attention into the NT and specifically with Fiona and Pete. And in 2023, I went up to the Northern Food Futures Conference, and Fiona and I co-presented, and we've also worked with Fiona and Pete with our COP workshop and our mentoring and our boots on the ground day up there. And we brought Fiona down as our special guest to the Maloon Rehydration Conference. We'll head up again to Darwin again this year for a global nature-based solutions conference. And I will actually head up as part of the Northern Food Futures Conference because I'm part of the Northern Drought Hub Natural Capital subcommittee. So, yeah, it's about, I guess, putting our effort into these things. Once we get a demonstration site established, we want to keep going back there and keep building on that and that relationship. But I also want to reflect on where we've taken a collective impact approach to our work here in WA. And I want to very briefly tell the story of the Maloon origin story in WA because it's a good one. In 2019, I received a phone call kind of out of the blue from Warren. So Craig's brother Warren, Ben Cole was in that, and I think it was Lockie, or it may have even been you, Craig, in that car. The guys were in the car and they just called me up to talk about some landscape rehydration work at Warren and Laurie's place at Boyup Brook. There was real joy in that phone call. And we all knew that Maloon had an approach that needed to be trialled in WA, and that if it was successful, it could really make a difference to key issues like the decreased rainfall that you face and salinity-related erosion. We hatched a plan to get Peter Hazel, my top man, across to deliver some workshops to Wide Open Ag and to some farmers after he presented at the Regen Ag Conference in Perth in 2019. At the same time, he was able to do a site inspection at Warren and Laurie's, and we developed a proposal for a farm plan. And then enter, to us, an organisation that we didn't know well at that stage, but we do now, and many of you here in WA do. Commonland came into the picture. And it was really a bit of a leap of faith for both of our organisations, and we formally agreed to co-fund the development of that farm plan for Paraway for Warren and Laurie. But in the meantime, my late chairman, Gary Nan AO, and I had come across to WA in September 2019. Lance, who many of you know well now, had applied for a job with us, but he was a long way away from us at that stage. But very kindly, he'd agreed to take Gary and I on a whirlwind, one day 600 kilometre round tour of the wheat belt. That's a very funny story on its own. But anyway, then we knew immediately that we could do some work together. And so in mid-2020, Lance, with a little bit of help from me, applied for a WA Community Stewardship grant. We were successful, and the rest really is history. Through the grant, we've been able to deepen and strengthen relationships here in WA and to make some new ones. We've since been able to bring our Futures Drought Fund funded COP project to WA, and we've been able to deliver 3 beautiful demonstration sites. One of those, of course, Warren and Laurie's, one of those with Stuart McAlpine, and one of those with the Colwolds as well. But the work at Paraway has been a resounding success. The trust that Warren and Laurie have shown in us has provided an opportunity, really, for us to step up and deliver some really good work. And I understand, I think it was Jim McIntosh from Commonland who actually shed a tear when he took the founder of Commonland, Willem, who I've had the privilege to meet, when he took Willem to Paraway and saw the results of the work. So for me, that was a great result. And actually, this work has gone much further than just a demonstration site or a series of demonstration sites. It's really led to a WA-specific approach to landscape rehydration. We're not doing the same work in WA as we're doing over east. We're focused here on addressing the two key issues of salinity and working waterlogging. It's really a very distinct approach where we're holding water up higher up in the landscape rather than reinstating valley floors. And the results have been really positive, and the photos help show the impact on the landscape. And over the course of the last 5 years, we've not only restored the hydrological function of the landscape in partnership with Warren and Laurie, but as I mentioned, we've been able to get some other demos up with Stuart, up close to Geraldton, and in Katanning in partnership with Bev, Jeff, and Jeremy Colold. There's really been significant progress for us in building the social ecosystem that's required for large-scale landscape rehydration and repair in WA. People have now heard of landscape rehydration, and for many people, they associate that approach with Maloon. We've made really good connections and meaningful connections too with Alan Beattie and the team at Noongar Land Enterprises, and we really look forward to working together to bring a cultural lens to the Australian government-funded Landscape Function Monitoring Toolkit and exploring that concept of what is a culturally functioning landscape. We've still got a lot of work to do. Obviously, there's heaps more work to do here in WA, but it's a good start, and this reflects our deep commitment to the principles of engagement for collective impact. In closing, I want to confirm the importance of those principles of engagement in developing and delivering projects with a collective impact approach. Trust and respect in particular are key principles, but they're also key pillars for success. Trust and respect take time to build. These are social processes that require deep listening and a real desire to contribute to something beyond what is possible for oneself or one's organisation, and to be part of and to contribute to collective impact. Being involved in collective impact requires building the culture of an organisation to support that involvement. And when I think of collective impact, I also pause and think of the internal culture of the Maloon Institute. We all work remotely. Our working lives are built on trust. We respect each other's strengths and we aim to fill the gaps around our weaknesses. We disagree, and we sometimes need some help to get through those disagreements, but we listen deeply to one another. We share perspectives openly because we know we're in a safe space. Our internal culture is strong and we're values-based and focused on our goals. If we are successfully to deliver collective impact as an organisation, and not just Maloon, but all of us in the organisations that we serve, we need internal cultures that support us to know ourselves and to do what is sometimes quite challenging work. When it comes to Maloon projects that have successfully delivered a collective impact approach, there are some commonalities. The recognition that these are social projects and that they depend on strong relationships, that they have a lead time that allows for the development of the social ecosystem to build trust and respect that come with time and effort on the part of all key stakeholders. And they really require us to drop the individual egocentric approach and move to a more connected ecosystem awareness, to go with the project, not our own personal or organisational view of success. We need to address the issues that the stakeholders reveal, not to deliver the project that we want. Ultimately, we need to continually build and monitor the culture of our organisations so that we can support collective impact. We must have the courage to open ourselves and our organisations so that we can walk together into a future that we'd all like to live in. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, no, don't go away yet. We've got a little bit of time for some questions. Have we got any from the audience? Bruce, I think Dave's going to bring the mic around so that our online participants can hear.
Thanks, Dave. Bruce Ivers from the WA Landcare Network. You touched a couple of times on the phrase culturally functional landscape. Can you just expand on what that means to you, please?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because I probably can't describe what that means, but I know that that's a concept that we want to explore. So we know that from working with the UN group back to country that access from multiple generations of people from the UN nation is really important for them to have access to land, for them to be able to fulfil their cultural obligations, that's really important. So we don't really have a definition of what a culturally functional landscape is, but we know that that's a concept that we've largely ignored. We haven't thought about it, we haven't considered it, but it's something that if we want to move forward together, then it's about time.
Thank you.
You talk about trust, and you gave some great examples of the shifts in trust across decades, and the kind of skeptics shifted over time. I really like the example of the problems with environmental law, kind of fragmenting things. Who are the critics now, and who doesn't trust? I mean, we're all a happy room here, we're all leaning in, but where do you see the kind of the pushback or challenges?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. So historically, Malone, even 5 years ago, was seen as a quite innovative organisation, and to potential funders, that reads as woo-woo, right? That it's an untested, unvetted approach. Now, I think we've been able to combat a lot of that. But still, I think in mainstream agriculture, in large corporate agriculture, we're still not seeing what we would have thought would have been easy wins. We would have thought there would be take-up of this approach quite quickly. It's a fast track to building natural capital that they can then commercialise. In our own minds, we saw these all as drivers that would contribute to the rapid and broad-scale uptake of this approach, but we haven't seen that. Some state-based regulators, some state-based funders are still sceptical. I think at the Australian government level, DAF and the various grant programs that they run, we've been successful just recently, and so we're seeing that they are beginning to understand and that we've built trust with them that we can deliver on grants that we're allocated. And we've also been successful with a partnership with Water New South Wales. So ironically, Water New South Wales on one hand, through the Sydney Drinking Water Catchment Audit, have been instructed to deliver more landscape rehydration projects. But on the other hand, Water New South Wales are regulators in New South Wales, and they find it a struggle to approve our projects. So, yeah, better than it was, but still not where it needs to be to scale up and deliver across the whole country.
Is there any online questions at all?
We're just
Nothing yet.
No,
Oh.
nothing yet. You got any more from the room? No? Oh, you're off the hook. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry,
Oh.
at the back.
Calista.
Sorry, I'll jump in before she leaves the set. Hi, Carolyn, Calista, GGA. I've got a question. How many Lancers have you got around Australia?
Ah.
I'm kind of familiar with your crew in New South Wales, but
There can never be another Lance. But yeah, it's a really good question, right? Because when we first started, back in 2017, when I joined Balloon, we became 5 people, and now we're sitting at about 23. Of those, we've probably got half a dozen landscape planners that have the capacity to go out, read the landscape, think about what needs to be done, have that conversation with the landholders, deeply listen, and then come back with a concept design and go all the way through to a detailed design process. So when we think about the technical expertise that's needed for that around calculating the speed and volume of water that's coming down the catchment and how we have to design and construct those meters to deal with that so that they don't wash away, so that they tip water onto the floodplain, they do everything that we want them to do. It's that's probably our biggest challenge, because we bring people in who might have components of those skill sets. They might have technical knowledge around water, they might have technical knowledge around education, but when we bring them together, we need to balloon them. That takes a bit of time. So yeah, that's probably what we've been doing over the last 6 years or so, and I think we're doing okay. There's people out there that definitely have the skills. There's also an army of flood engineers that I'm very familiar with from my previous professional life, that I know with a little bit of skewing of the why could be easily applied to doing this technical design work. Do they have the capacity to be engaged in collective impact projects? Possibly not. That's a step beyond, and requires a real desire to do more than just design something that's technically rigorous. We're all about healing landscapes and doing that in partnership with others, and that's a different headspace to be in. So we know them when we've got them, and we've been really privileged in, I think in our most recent round of recruitment, we had 70 applicants for one job. So we were blown away by that. We were just so amazed, and the calibre of those candidates. So there are people out there that want to do this work, and our job is to find them and train them up. Yeah.
One last question.
Just warming up now.
Just fill it.
Okay. Hi, Carolyn. Wendy Bradshaw from down south. I was just wondering about landscape rehydration work that you're doing. Is it based on Yeoman's T-line contour system?
Yeah. So, the landscape office. I'm going to answer that one. But the contour work that we do, it's essentially putting in like a swale. We call them contours, or like a yeoman's approach, but it's really all around holding. Everything we do is around slowing that water down, getting the vegetation to re-establish so that we can hold that water in the landscape for a little bit longer. We can improve soil health. We look closely at how the land is managed, but those contours, there's a design process there, so that we're looking for steps in the landscape about where it's appropriate for those contours to go. We're looking at where we want to move that water in the landscape, what the landholder is up to and what they're trying to achieve, and how that can benefit the landscape function more broadly. So there's a lot of work that goes into looking at maps and looking at things like LiDAR data or drone-derived topographic data. there's quite a bit of walking around and having a look. And then there is a consideration again of that volume and speed of that water that's going to move through that catchment, and how do you design that contour to manage that volume of water. So yeah, it's a mix of that technical rigour and responding to what that landholder is trying to do, and then meeting that of, okay, what's the best way forward then if we're looking at restoring landscape function, or we're looking at managing a particular issue in the landscape. I don't know, Lance, if you want to add anything to that?
I think you've done well.
Seek him out afterwards this evening, Wendy.
All right. Thank you so much, Carolyn. That was really a lot of information for us to take in.